Hey bitches, welcome to my channel. My name is Will, and spooky season is upon us. Let's be honest, by my standards, spooky season never really ended, but the season is growing closer. We only have a little while left of summer. Children are going back to school. Pretty soon the leaves are going to start falling, and it's going to be the best season of all. And in honor of Halloween growing closer to us, I thought it would be fun to sort of start a little series where I discuss some of my favorite horror movies where people die and decide if the characters in the movies deserved what happened to them or not. Because let's be honest, some horror movie characters are absolute idiots and walk to their own deaths very gracefully, and others are innocent victims who genuinely didn't deserve what happened to them. Today, however, I wanted to talk about the movie that started off my love for horror, which is Carrie. Carrie is based off of the novel by Stephen King, and there are 3 movie adaptations as well as a musical. The movies were released in 1976, I believe, and then 2002 and 2013. But my favorite version, and the version I'm going to be focusing on for this video, is the 1976 version with the iconic Sissy Spacek. Side note, I do already have a video on my channel where I was talking about Carrie, and I was sort of talking about how creepy it truly is, and I was trying to debunk whether Carrie was evil from the start or if circumstances kind of changed her behavior, but that video was just really slow paced and awful, so I'm going to disregard literally everything I said in that video, and instead I'm going to analyze the people who died and whether or not they deserved it. And if you're gonna jump into my comments and say, well, nobody deserves to die, then this is not the channel for you. So let's get started. So very quickly on into the movie, we learn that Carrietta White is an outcast among her classmates and is bullied by her peers, especially a girl by the name of Chris Hargensen. She's kind of the ringleader of all of the torment. Chris, in true popular girl style, acts like winning a PE game is like winning the Hunger Games, and so she greatly overreacts when Carrie misses a ball during their volleyball game.
You eat shit.
Right off the bat, we hate Chris. I wish I could say that she was a bit dramatic and high schoolers aren't really that petty, but I can't truthfully say that. However, to make matters worse for Carrie, when they go into the locker room to clean off after that volleyball game, Carrie gets her first period. Due to the fact that her mother is a religious fanatic, Carrie has no idea what the fuck a period is and is under the impression that she's dying. She seeks help in some of her classmates who aren't very helpful. This scene always makes me so angry. The poor girl genuinely believed that she was bleeding to death, and everyone saw that and still was just like, oh, it's just Carrie. Oh well. And every single one of them in the locker room pretty much was joining in on it and doing so. Even Sue Snell, who we later learn is supposed to be like the stereotypical like Christian good girl character, even she was joining in the fun and throwing pads and tampons at Carrie, later insisting that it's just Carrie. Not only did she participate in it, but she was the one who took the tampon thing off the wall and grabbed them to start throwing them. So she was a very active participant in the torment, and she was supposed to be one of the better students, which makes the whole thing even more awful. Gym teacher Miss Desjardins, or in this movie adaptation Miss Collins, hears all the commotion and steps in, confronting the students, especially Sue, and sort of demands to know what they're doing. Sue kind of laughs it off with Miss Collins and is like, it's just Carrie, she's just got her period.
What are you doing? She just got her period. Who's got her period? What are you doing?
And the gym teacher is obviously kind of furious, and she breaks up the tampon tossing. Miss Collins tries to get Carrie to calm down with no avail, and so she slaps Carrie across the face. And then she sort of orders Carrie to just grow up, stand up, and take care of herself, which Carrie did not like hearing. So she kind of panicked and caused the light bulb above them to fizzle out. Miss Collins does end up being really sweet though and apologizes and telling Carrie she didn't realize what was going on, and she tells Carrie that it's okay and that she's going to talk to her about it so she understands. So presumably she explained what was happening to Carrie, so she finally had a grasp of what was going on in her own body since her own mother failed to teach her so. Miss Collins does lose a tiny bit of likability when she reports the incident to the principal, Mr. Morton, however, and confesses that she knows how they felt because it was just her period, for God's sake.
To do something. I will. But see, the thing is, Morty, that, I knew how they felt.
Mm-hmm.
It was just her period, for God's sake.
Phoebes, you want to help?
Oh, I wish I could, but I don't want to.
Miss Collins, did you not literally just see her freaking out in the locker room because she was convinced that she was dying? Now you're saying that you wanted to take her and shake her? I wanted to take and shake the other assholes who were throwing pads and tampons at Carrie. Anyways, Mr. Morton basically tells Miss Collins that she'll have to punish them, which Miss Collins agrees. The principal, Morton, is absolutely awful. He doesn't even know Carrie's name, and he doesn't even care to want to learn her name. He hears her name 3 times in a row, and he still refuses to learn that her name is Carrie White.
Miss Finch, you said in Cassie, right?
It's Carrie White.
Come in, Cassie.
Carrie.
Miss Finch, would you bring in a dismissal slip? Thought you might take the rest of the day and go home. Take care of yourself, Cassie.
We're all sorry about this incident, Cassie.
And the award for biggest dickhead of a principal goes to, drumroll please. That's right, Principal Morton. Seriously, this guy is a huge asshole. He's kind of quick with the whole incident and sends her home really quickly, and that is that for him. He doesn't really think much of it, tells Miss Collins that she'll have to think of an appropriate punishment, and that basically ends the whole situation for him. He doesn't really do much to help anyone involved. So Carrie goes home and waits for her mother, who receives a call to find out what happened. Margaret White then invites Carrie downstairs and has a chat with her about her body.
Yo, woman now.
For that I mean she basically tells Carrie that she's an abomination and makes her go sit in the prayer closet for bleeding out of her vagina. This scene lets us know right off the bat just how truly awful Margaret is. Carrie was just begging to be talked to, and she was mad that she wasn't informed on what was going on with her body, because she was humiliated in front of all these people. Margaret basically just tells her that Eve was weak and that the first sin was blood and that she needs to start praying because she's going straight to hell at the road she's on right now. She clearly has no sympathy for Carrie and seems more infuriated with her own daughter for getting her first period than she does with her daughter's classmates who were throwing pads and tampons at her and humiliating her for having such a thing. I don't know about you, but I personally think humiliating a girl for having her first period is buying you a good ticket to hell, not simply having the period. But Margaret seems to have other ideas, and she shoves Carrie into the prayer closet for several hours, which is a regular occurrence in their household. Eventually, once Carrie was in the closet, she gave in and started praying anyways after having a little fit about it. This prayer closet was obviously designed for the sole purpose of shoving Carrie in so she could pray away her sins. She's got several religious artifacts in there. She has a Bible and then a candle set up so she can read. There's this really creepy sculpture of Saint Sebastian, who is the patron saint of archers and athletes and those who want a saintly death. And just several religious artifacts like that throughout the whole closet, and Carrie is obviously in there all the time. I'm not sure exactly how long Carrie was in the prayer closet for, but it's nighttime by the time she's finally let out, and she thanks her mama for finally letting her out of the prayer closet. In the next scene, we meet some more of Carrie's future victims in her English class with her teacher, Mr. Fromm. Mr. Fromm is reading one of the students' poems, and that student ends up being Tommy Ross, who is Sue's boyfriend, and he's also an athlete. We know this because Mr. Fromm jokes about how his poem is so much different from him hitting home runs and running touchdowns. Mr. Fromm finishes the poem and asks the class if they have any criticisms, and they're all quiet until finally Carrie White decides to speak up, and she calls Tommy's poem beautiful. Clearly she doesn't speak in class very often because everyone is surprised when they hear her, and Mr. Fromm seems to think that this is such a awful thing to say that he decides to mock her for an excessively long period of time for saying that the poem is beautiful.
Carrie White. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Beautiful! Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. Is that the beautiful you mean, is it, Carrie? I'm afraid, Carrie, this is hardly a criticism.
No wonder why the students thought it was okay to throw pads and tampons at her, when even the teachers are mocking her for the first time she decides to speak in class. This is one of the reasons why quiet kids stay quiet throughout school, because people make such a big deal about it when they finally do speak, and shit like this makes us never want to speak again. I was a quiet kid. Tommy Ross ends up defending Carrie though, and stopping the conversation, which is honestly really admirable, especially considering the fact that Tommy is a popular student and he would have barely known Carrie either, but he still stepped up and realized that his teacher was being an asshole rather than laughing alongside the teacher and Carrie's other peers. When the other students return to gym class, Miss Collins decides it's time to dish out their just desserts. She decided that they were going to be attending her detention, but she makes it clear to them that this was not her first choice of punishment, and tells them that her idea of a perfect punishment for the little stunt they pulled would have been 3-day suspension and refusal of their prom tickets. But it's going to be her detention, and she's going to make them sweat. Most of the girls showed at least a little remorse, or decided that Carrie White wasn't worth missing prom over, so they accepted their detention and went on with their lives. All except Chris Hargensen, of course. She believed that she was being wrongfully punished for something that wasn't wrong, and she wanted to fight the system. She tried to convince all of her friends to riot with her, but they refused because they didn't want to miss their prom. And Sue even tells her to just shut up. But Chris Hargensen doesn't want to shut up, no. She's not going to take that from anybody. So she decides to march up to Miss Collins, where she's slapped in the face. Miss Collins tells her that she's out of the prom, and Chris tells her that this isn't over. It's not over at all. Sue actually ends up being the most remorseful for the whole incident, and decides that she wants to make it up to Carrie somehow. So she decides that she should convince Tommy to take Carrie to the prom instead of herself. Because why wouldn't the school's most antisocial student want to go to prom with a super popular kid? And I know he defended her in class and was nice to her, but still. Sue is just convinced that this is the right way to make amends though, and so Tommy agrees and says that he'll do it, and he asks Carrie to prom once, and she runs away. Because Carrie isn't that stupid. She knows who Tommy goes around with, and she doesn't know that Sue feels any remorse. For all she knows, this is just a big trick on her, which she confides in Miss Collins, who finds her crying. Miss Collins insists that this would be a great experience for Carrie and that this probably isn't a trick, and she gives Carrie a little pep talk, but then she goes to talk to Tommy and Sue and find out what the fuck they're doing. Sue is very vague and just basically says she thinks it'd be good for Carrie to socialize and get out with the crowd a little bit, and Miss Collins isn't really buying any of it. She insists that they're not going to hurt Carrie anymore, and she's going to make sure of that, and Sue insists that they're just trying to help her and that she can't stop somebody from asking somebody else to prom, so they all kind of just agree with it. Tommy asks Carrie again, and Carrie says yes. I do know that Sue had the best of intentions with this. However, she didn't even apologize to Carrie or say anything to Carrie whatsoever. She just is like, hey boyfriend, why don't you take her to prom? I'm gonna miss my prom, you take her instead. And it seems a little I don't know, it seems a little whack to me that she's doing the most. She could have at least apologized or tried to invite Carrie in to hang out with her or something, rather than just straight up being like, hey, this is the biggest social event of the year, take her to prom, Tommy. Meanwhile, Chris does some talking or something with her boyfriend Billy Nolan, who's a huge asshole, and convinces him to go along with her scheme of getting revenge on Carrie. Now Carrie has to tell her mom that she's going to prom, which is a scary scenario.
Personally, before it's too late for me to...
Margaret obviously insists that Carrie's going down Sinner's Road and that she can't go to prom and that it'd be a terrible thing and that she needs to ask for forgiveness, and tries to tell Carrie that they'll move away and that she can't go to prom. But Carrie unleashes her powers and tells her mom she is going to prom, and there's nothing that Margaret can do to stop her anymore.
I'm going, Mama. Things are gonna change around here.
Yes, queen. Go off, girl boss. Pussy hat slay.
Margaret accuses Carrie of being a witch, but Carrie insists that she's not a witch. There are other people who can do what she does, and she just wants to be able to go to prom like everybody else. It is really sad because she did try and have a genuine conversation with Margaret first, where she was saying that she had to try and fit in and be like everybody else. Margaret didn't listen, so Carrie brought out the powers to make her listen. Then Carrie starts making her own prom dress. Her mother kind of ignores the subject until prom day. After Carrie's ready, Margaret goes up to her one last time and begs her not to go, saying that she'll tell Tommy that she's sick, telling Tommy that she'll change her mind, yelling at Carrie for showing her dirty pillows, or breasts.
They're called breasts, and every woman has them.
This is when she tells Carrie that there will be a judgment and they're all gonna laugh at her.
They're all gonna laugh at you.
Carrie insists that her mother's just trying to make her feel bad and obviously stop her from going to her prom, so she tells her mother to shut up and wait until she's gone to do anything, and Carrie heads out the door to her own prom anyways, where she was actually given a really nice time thanks to Tommy. We can see one girl named Frida who was hanging out with Tommy and Carrie, and then Frida's own boyfriend. Frida was actually being quite nice to Carrie, complimenting her dress, letting the both of them sit with her and her boyfriend. And I know Frida went to the same school because I saw her like talking to Sue in one previous scene and like helping set up, but I didn't see her anywhere in the gym scenes with the students who were throwing things, so I don't think she was one of the bad ones who took part in the incident. She was genuinely being nice to Carrie and trying to give her a good prom experience, as well as Tommy. One of the mean girls, however, Norma, decides to mock Carrie as soon as she walks in and starts laughing the second she sees her. Norma is one of the only ones who does this. Everyone kind of sees Carrie, but no one really reacts to it except Norma. Norma is the only one laughing, even though she's the fool who's wearing a baseball cap to her senior prom. Not even a baseball cap that matches her outfit. She's wearing that stupid bright red baseball cap with a dress that looks like it should be on a grandma in a nursing home. Norma is obviously excited for the prank that's about to come, which we know Norma is involved in because there was an earlier scene where Chris insisted that she was going to be at prom and something was going to unfold, and she told Norma not to worry and that she would get to be a part of things. Honestly, pretty disgusting. Like, Chris would have had to tell Norma, hey, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna dump pig's blood on Carrie. And Norma would have been like, great, that's brilliant. That's the perfect thing to do in this situation. Like, Norma would have had to actively agree to it. We also saw who I'm assuming is Norma's boyfriend agree to take place in this too, because the day of prom he decides that he wants to collect the ballots, which is really suspicious, but nobody really cares and says, okay, you can collect the ballots. So everything is in place for the big joke on Carrie. Carrie is nervous and hesitant to dance with Tommy and really get involved in things, but Miss Collins finds her and has a nice conversation with her and sort of assures her that everything at the prom is going to be okay, and eventually Carrie feels more comfortable and agrees to dance with Tommy. Tommy shows her how to dance and he's super sweet, and he even admits to Carrie that he's glad that he took her and that he likes it. The two of them even share a kiss and a really nice dance. Eventually it's time to vote for prom king and queen. We know shit's about to go down. Sue sneaks in to check on Tommy and Carrie and is pleased to see that they're having a really nice time. But she ends up catching a little bit of Chris and Billy's plans, but she catches it all too late. Sue goes to look at Chris and Miss Collins sees her and assumes that she's trying to sabotage Carrie's prom experience and stops her. And then when Miss Collins turns around, Carrie's covered in pig's blood. Most of the crowd is shocked and kind of disgusted by what happens and they don't know how to react, but Norma, of course, right off the bat starts cracking up and thinks it's absolutely hilarious. Her plan went down a treat, I guess. The first death of the movie was Tommy Ross, and one of the only deaths that wasn't at the fault of Carrie. He was hit by the bucket that contained the pig's blood when it fell down, and the force knocked him out and killed him. And Norma was still laughing. Somebody died right before her eyes, and she still thought that this was like the funniest thing ever, and she was enjoying her prank. Carrie obviously freaks out, and this is when she starts to lose touch with reality and starts her big prom massacre. So since Tommy was the first death, did he deserve it? The answer to this one should be pretty easy. Tommy did absolutely not deserve it, in this whatsoever. He didn't have to go the full mile and give her a really great prom treatment, but he did. He made her feel special and valued as a person, and he didn't just like take her and kind of let her sit by herself. He included her, he sat with some of his friends with her, he danced with her, he kissed her, he gave her the whole prom experience and even invited her to like their little after party and everything. He did not skip out when it came to giving her the full prom experience, even though he obviously would have rather gone with his girlfriend Sue. And he was always nice from the start anyways, when he defended her in class when the teacher was being a dick. So he was a genuine good person and did not deserve to die. In the next scene, Carrie sort of begins to hallucinate that everyone is laughing at her as her mother's words haunt her, and it's kind of hard to determine who is actually laughing or not. We know that Norma is, but I don't think the rest of them were genuinely laughing. Maybe a couple of them, but it's hard to pick and choose which ones were really laughing. Miss Collins genuinely looked like devastated when she turned around and saw that Carrie was covered in pig's blood, so I'm gonna say she wasn't laughing. Maybe some of Chris's friends were, but even so, they looked rather shocked when the whole thing unfolded, and somebody did just die right in front of them, so I'm gonna give most of them the benefit of the doubt and say that they weren't laughing for real. So then the killing frenzy starts, and I don't think Carrie's deaths are even like necessarily like targeted deaths. I think she just kind of goes for the kills, and some people are just like collateral damage, but she just kind of goes for it. There are several people who die that are unrecognizable, and I haven't really seen them, so I'm gonna go out and say that those people didn't deserve it. They were just prom attendees, were caught up in this fucked up situation. The next recognizable character death was Norma, who was blasted by a fire hose. I'm gonna be honest here, she absolutely deserved her fate. She never showed any remorse for the situation and thought it was really funny to throw pads and tampons at Carrie, and she actively agreed to help Chris with her plan. She wanted to be a part of this, and she wanted to be in on this prank, and she thought that it was a good idea. And obviously she wouldn't have expected this to be the outcome, but she thought that this was a good idea. And she obviously doesn't think death is awful because she just watched someone die right in front of her, and chances are if somebody else died instead of Norma and it was somebody she didn't like, she'd be laughing just the same. So Norma absolutely deserved her fate. She was a terrible character who never had any redeemable qualities whatsoever that made her not deserve this. Next we see Morton and Fromm standing by the microphone, and where they're standing gets blasted by the fire hose and they get electrocuted. Quite honestly, these were two deaths that I didn't feel any remorse for either. They were both assholes and didn't really care about the situation whatsoever. And it was clear that neither one of them cared about the well-being of Carrie whatsoever, since Mr. Morton couldn't even remember her name. They didn't even have that much of a reaction to the pig's blood being dropped on Carrie. They kind of just were like, oh yeah, that's what's happening right now. Mr. Morton didn't even have the look of extreme shock or anything. He kind of just looked at the situation kind of dumbfounded and didn't seem too surprised by it either. Well, some characters you could visibly see that they were shocked and they like were gasping. Morton didn't really convey any of that, which was kind of disgusting that he could see this unfold at one of his school's events and not even give a fuck. Mr. Fromm was a huge asshole too. He humiliated Carrie, didn't really care about her well-being. So they both deserved it too. I didn't feel any remorse upon seeing either of their deaths. The next recognizable death was Miss Collins, which is actually quite sad considering how much she cared about Carrie in this movie and how excited she got when Carrie won prom queen, and how much she was really rooting for Carrie to be included and rooting for her to have a good time. She also cared so much about the fact that she didn't want Tommy or Sue to end up hurting Carrie, and it ended up happening, and she was devastated by it. She absolutely did not deserve her death in this. It's kind of ironic because in the book she was a little more of an asshole and she didn't die. In the movie she was super sweet and she did, but she did not deserve what happened to her whatsoever. Carrie leaves the school and we see it burning down behind her, so we assume that everybody left behind, if they didn't get out, was burned to death. Frida is one who I don't think deserved what happened to her because she wasn't involved in the whole situation, and she was kind of rooting for Carrie to have a good time too. She was friendly with her. She was sort of one who was helping to give her a normal prom experience. I'm also going to go out and say some of the victims, like Helen and them, didn't deserve to die in there either. I know that they were assholes and what they did to Carrie wasn't right, but that doesn't mean that they deserve their death either. I was in high school once myself, and while it doesn't make it right, I can understand how peer pressure can affect people, especially when their ringleader is someone as vicious as Chris Hargensen. And I know how easy it is to hate somebody just because everybody else hates them. And analyzing the locker room scene, some of them were a lot more enthusiastic about it than others. Some of them were kind of standing back and joining in, while the main ones who were excited about what they were doing were Sue, Chris, and Norma. The others at least kind of let Carrie be at the prom. They weren't going out of their way to humiliate her there. They kind of just let her be after the incident, and we never got the chance for them to have any remorse or treat Carrie any differently later because they were killed off. I think the majority of the students didn't deserve to die, and it was sad that they all got swept up in this messy situation. A lot of people did wrong things and treated Carrie differently, but it was a school that did this. Obviously, even the teachers treated Carrie differently. Everybody had this way about Carrie where they didn't like her, so it kind of makes sense that the students would think that something like this is okay. Most of them just accepted their punishment and were ready to sort of move on, except Norma and Chris. The others I don't think deserve death. The next deaths that take place, however, are Billy and Chris outside, and they absolutely deserve this. They were making their escape and still couldn't shake off the idea of killing Carrie or getting their revenge on Carrie. They were watching in the window and saw what Carrie was capable of. They saw her kill some of their friends. They saw her kill Miss Collins. They saw all of this unfold, and they still decided that they wanted to take their shot at running down Carrie with their car. I don't know how they thought this was going to go. They could have just driven off and had their sweet escape and been fine, but they decided that they wanted to stay and get their revenge on Carrie, and they were laughing at it. They were laughing and having fun with this situation after they just watched many of their classmates and friends get brutally murdered by a girl with telekinetic powers. How are they laughing right now? How are they enjoying this? And how are they thinking it's a good idea to go for Carrie? Carrie obviously flips their car and ends up killing them, and those were two of the most deserved deaths in the whole movie. Had the pig's blood not been poured, which was all her idea, I don't think Carrie would have had this reaction. I think she would have had a nice time. Chris didn't seem to give a fuck about the death of any of her classmates either, so why should we give a fuck about her death? She never had any scenes that made her even somewhat redeemable. She never showed any remorse for anything. She walked, or I guess drove, into her death head first. Billy was an awful character too. He was an asshole and very temperamental. Obviously agreed to help Chris just ruin a girl's life. After Carrie cooled off a little bit, she went home where she cleaned off and decided to start looking for her mother. Once she found her, she decided that it was time for her to pray and do whatever her mother wanted, but obviously Margaret decided it was too late for Carrie because she stabbed her in the back. Margaret and Carrie got into a little tussle, and Margaret tried to kill Carrie off, and Carrie killed Margaret first. She raised Carrie by shoving her in closets and hitting her on the head with a Bible. If Carrie had grown up knowing these crucial details about her body, this whole thing wouldn't have been as big of an issue as it was. Carrie's whole life, Margaret was convinced that Carrie was nothing more than a sin, and she still continued to raise her and teach her the way she was going. And even in the final scene, if she just accepted Carrie and talked to her and accepted the fact that Carrie was ready to start praying, instead of stabbing her in the back, Margaret would have lived. But Margaret was a terrible and abusive person who never gave Carrie anything she needed to function as a human being in the real world, and so her death was very much deserved. She kind of had it coming to her right away. Even if she thought she was doing everything in Carrie's best interest, trying to keep her away from sin, trying to prevent this thing from happening, even if she thought she was doing everything in Carrie's best interest, it wasn't working out that way, because keeping Carrie in the dark wasn't helping whatsoever. It made her reactions more severe to things because she didn't know and she wasn't allowed to do these things, so it caused her to be more temperamental and have reactions, and it's what caused Margaret's death in the ending. And the last death in the movie was Carrie, who stayed behind in the house with her mom when it collapsed. It's hard to determine if Carrie deserved her death or not, because it's hard to analyze if she actually became evil or if, because a lot of people do believe that Carrie was evil, so she deserved to just die at the end of it all, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. When Carrie's powers were first starting to develop, I don't think she had any intention of using them for harm or even for the purposes of evil. The first few times we saw her powers were when she was in great emotional distress, and so her powers kind of came through. Even directly before the dance, she had no intentions of killing or harming her mother. She just wanted to be able to go to the dance. And if the prank never happened, I believe her powers would have mellowed out instead of becoming deadly. Immediately after she killed Margaret, she was remorseful, and she obviously showed some remorse for the situation after it happened and she realized what she'd done. As she was telling Margaret, she was finally ready to pray, and she told her mother that she was right in what would happen. Her mother's pep talk also didn't help the situation either, because she was told that everyone was going to laugh at her. So Carrie genuinely believed that the whole gymnasium of people were laughing at her before she killed them. Not that that makes their deaths right, but I don't think Carrie is completely at fault for what happened either. So I do really quickly just also want to set the disclaimer that I don't believe Carrie should have just gotten away with all the murders, or that being bullied makes it okay to murder. But I still don't think that Carrie is inherently evil, and I don't think she deserved how she was raised by her mother and treated by her peers, which is what led to the eventual incident and her own death. She was pushed to her limit after not just one night of torment, but basically her whole life. The murders weren't okay, but neither was Carrie's upbringing, which is why I don't believe she deserved death. The characters who did deserve death were because they voluntarily put themselves into situations such as taking part in a vile prank and expected no consequences. I don't condone murder, but they all had deaths I feel like could have been avoided by not taking part in the prank and not attempting to kill her themselves. I want to take this time to remind everybody that having a bad day is not an excuse to murder, and neither is being bullied. You hear that media talking about white teenage boys regarding school shootings. I'd also like to set the reminder that if you happen to come across a telekinetic girl, especially one who's just massacred her entire prom group, don't attempt to take her down with your car. You will die. That is all. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. They were dealing with a very powerful being without realizing it, and the power got out of control and snapped. And they were testing the limits of her power in a way. They assumed she wouldn't be powerful, they assumed she wouldn't fight back, and they assumed that it would be a humiliating and awful experience for her. They never knew the power that she held and what would become of them if they did their little prank. Well, that was all the deaths in Carrie. A good majority of the characters were just bystanders who were victims of the story and weren't really involved in the situation and didn't really deserve to die. But there were a few who did deserve their fates. I'm gonna give out a special award for the least deserved death to Tommy Ross, because he was genuinely a nice guy, which is really rare these days, and he was helping Carrie and giving her a genuine experience. He didn't even really understand what was happening, and he got hit by a bucket and he died. Absolutely did not deserve this. And we're giving out our award for the most deserved death to Chris Hargensen. I was really torn between Chris Hargensen and Margaret White, but I decided that Chris Hargensen took the cake for the most deserved death because she sort of caused the whole death by doing this whole prank. She was so vindictive and so mean and held such a grudge that she had to do this at prom just because she did something wrong and was being punished for it. Margaret was terrible and abusive, but I give her a little bit of slack because she did genuinely love Carrie and she was convinced that there was going to be a judgment. Doesn't make it right the way she treated Carrie, but she did have some love for her buried deep somewhere. Whereas Chris just held resentment and anger, and all of this was literally because she did something wrong in the first place. So she absolutely was the most deserved and most satisfying death in the movie by far. Well, that's it for this first episode of Did They Deserve It? Feel free to let me know who I should cover next, I guess, or your personal beliefs. Do you think Carrie White deserved to die? Do you think some of these other characters deserve their deaths? I don't know. That being said though, I'll see you in my next video. Peace out.